Mr. Bowman here. Today's learning objective is in green. We're learning to solve quadratic equations, and we're focusing on how to solve it with each of the three methods we previously learnt. So the first step, before we actually go ahead and solve quadratics, we do need to recognize, well, we have to simplify. It has to look a certain way before we actually solve. And just to recap, it must always be equal to 0. And just as an example, let's say I've got 0 equals x squared plus 5x plus 6. That idea that one of the two sides of the equal sign is equal to 0 means you can go ahead and use one of our methods to solve them. And once you've gone through that simplifying process, you can start solving. And then you do have a few different methods that you can pick. So you can factorize and then solve. You can solve by completing the square. And finally, you can solve using the quadratic equation. So hopefully you recall each of those. So the quadratic equation, and just to note, from here, you can actually link and get your calculator to do most of that work once you've got that A, B, and C values. What we're going to do for the rest of this video is we are going to look at two examples, but we're going to use each three methods to solve each of those examples. And hopefully you can see whatever method you pick, you should be able to get to the same answer. So example number 1, this is going to be our easy example. And I've got an equation x, and then in brackets, x minus 1. That there comes to 42. So the first step, we don't have that equal to 0 part, so we do need to go ahead and simplify it a little bit. I'm probably going to go ahead and expand that brackets. X squared minus x equals 42. And then x squared here, that's making me think it's going to be a quadratic. And I then need to make it equal to 0, so I'm going to go minus 42, which is going to leave me with x squared minus x minus 42. That there is going to be equal to 0. We're now going to solve it using each of the three methods. So let's start off with the factorizing method. So our initial equation, x squared minus negative x minus 42 equals 0. We're thinking, well, what numbers are going to add to negative 1 and multiply to negative 42? Hopefully you're thinking 6 and 7. So it's going to be minus 7 plus 6. Because they add to negative 1, they also multiply to negative 42. Once we've done that, the factorized method, we're really just going to break it down into its two equations. So equation number 1 will always be based on the first bracket. That is x minus 7 is equal to 0. Equation number 2, x plus 6 is equal to 0. And we then go ahead and solve. So we're going to go plus 7 plus 7. So our first answer of x is equal to positive 7. And then we're going to go minus 6 minus 6. And our second answer for x is going to be negative 6. Okay, so we're now going to look at completing the square. And this is going to be one of the more complicated methods that we're going to look at. But let's start off again with our original equation, x squared minus x minus 42. That there is equal to 0. So we're going to start off with writing that invisible 1. And our first step, when we complete the square, we need to find out what 1/2 of that number is, and in our case 1/2 of that is going to be negative half. We then need to square that number, and that's going to get us to 1/4. So what this tells us is this number here is going to be sitting inside our bracket. This number here we're going to have to add and subtract that. So we're going to go x squared minus x plus 1/4. Don't forget that positive 1 always goes first. Minus 1/4. And because we're dealing with quarters, I'm going to change this 42 to have a denominator of 4. And that's going to be minus 168 divided by 4. And all of that comes to 0. The first three parts, they are a perfect square. So it's going to be x minus 1/2. And we got that number from above. Squared minus, or we'll make that equals, so this here should be minus 169 over 4. We're going to move it to the other side to make it positive 169 over 4. We're then going to get rid of that square root, so we're going to go x minus 1/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 169 over 4. X minus 1/2 is going to be equal to plus or minus, so the square root of 169 is 13, the square root of 4 is 2, which is 6.5. But let's leave it in that fraction form for now. We're now going to get rid of this minus 1/2, that becomes plus 1/2, so we're going to have 1/2 plus or minus 13 over 2. And then our first value for x is going to be 1/2 plus 13 over 2, which is 14 over 2, which is going to be equal to 7. And that was our answer from before. And I'm just going to work over in this direction because I'm running out of room. So our second answer for x is going to be negative 1/2. Oh, no, sorry, positive 1/2 minus 13 over 2. So that's going to become negative 12 over 2, which is equal to negative 6. And that was our second answer of x that we got there before. And now we're going to move on our final one. So I'm going to call this one QE, quadratic equation. And again, every method, you always got to start by writing down that equation. So it's going to be negative x minus 42 equals to 0. This time around, we need to find out, well, what is the a value, what is the b value, and what is the c value? So our a value, don't forget, we have an invisible 1. B value, we've also got an invisible 1. And our c value is pretty clear, negative 42. We then need to write down our quadratic equation, and we're going to substitute everything here. So x is going to be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is divided by 2a. So I just want to note at this step here, you actually can use your graphics calculator. Well, apologies that I've spelled that wrong. You can use your graphics calculator to find out the values of the two x's, but here we're just going to carry on using the equation. If you do want to know the graphics calculator method, do let me know and I can show you how to do that. So we're going to have negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 42. All of that is going to be divided by 2a, which is just 2 times 1. So let's simplify that. So that's going to be negative 1. So 1 squared is 1. All of this here is going to become positive 148. So that's going to be plus or minus the square root of 169 divided by 2. And that's going to be negative 1/2 plus or minus 13 over 2. And I just want to note at this step here, this part and this part here for completing the square is actually the exact same. So that's how you know you've done it right. And if you carried on with all that maths, so we got negative 1/2. Actually just spotted a awkward typo, but that b should actually be negative 1. It's not going to have a too big of an impact on our answer, but that 1 there needs to be negative 1, and that there needs to be negative 1. So I've just added negative signs over here. That means this 169, that's still going to change. That's still going to be the same because negative 1 squared is 169, or it was 1 still, which will stay at 169. I'm just going to get rid of the negative signs up front here because that does impact our answer for that. When we go ahead and calculate that, we're going to get the same type of answer as before. We've got 1/2 plus 13/2. That's going to be 14 over 2, which is going to get us to an answer of 7. So, and that matches our answer. And then our second answer is going to be 1/2 minus 13 over 2. And again, that's going to get us negative 12 over 2, which is going to get us to negative 6 as our final answer. So it doesn't matter what 3 methods you used, you were going to get to the same answer. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to pause the video. If you think you've got a good understanding of it, just get straight into questions. But if you want to listen to some more, please do. I'm pausing the video. I'm going to write on a harder example, and we're going to go through very, very quickly how to solve it using each of these 3 methods. Okay, we're back, and the example we're going to look at this time around here, example number 2. So we've got the equation x, and then in brackets 6x minus 1. That there is going to be equal to positive 1. our job is to go ahead and solve it, figure out what x is equal to. And first step, we need to make sure it is equal to 0. So let's go ahead and expand and rearrange. So that's going to be x times 6x is 6x squared minus x is equal to 1. I'm then going to do minus 1 to make sure one of the sides has nothing on it. So 6x squared minus x minus 1 is equal to 0. So there's our simplified equation. We can then go ahead and use all of the three methods to calculate that. So our first one, hopefully you can recall what it was. That was the F method, which stood for factorizing. So 6x squared minus x minus 1 equals to 0. And when you're factorizing with a coefficient in front, you are going to be using that grouping method that we've looked at earlier. So do revise and recap that if you need to. But we start off by doing 6 times negative 1 equals negative 6. We now need to think what numbers multiply to negative 6 but add to negative 1. And I'm thinking it's going to be negative 3 and positive 2. So we're going to split the x up. That's going to be 6x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 1 equals to 0. And this is the grouping part of the name. We need to factorize the first group. We then factorize the second group. And then we can go ahead and finish. So that there is going to be equal to 3x because they've got an x in common. And a 3 in common. Then that's going to be 2x. And we're going to have minus 1 over there. And we're then going to go plus. Looks like these guys, this next group, have nothing in common. So we're just going to put a 1 because they've got nothing else in common. Same brackets the same. And I'm liking this. You can see how we've got the same bracket coming up twice. That means we haven't done any silly mistakes. So it's going to be 2x minus 1. And then the leftover bits, the 3x and that positive 1, form the second bracket. And there's our quadratic. We go ahead. Now that it's factorized, we can split it up into its two parts to find out the two answers to this equation. So if x minus 1 is equal to 0, we need to do plus 1 plus 1. So that means 2x is equal to 1, which means the first value for x will be equal to 1 over 2. So we've got some fractions here. Nothing wrong with fractions if they're your answers. We're then going to do the same for the next bit. 3x plus 1 equals 0. We're going to go minus 1 minus 1. 3x equals negative 1. That times 3 is going to become divided by 3. So our second value for x is going to be negative 1 divided by 3. Okay, so the next method that we're going to look at, completing the square. So we'll call that CS this time. And as always, we start off with writing down our equation. And the annoying thing about this one here is that 6, because completing the square only really works when you're dealing with x squared by itself. So what we need to do is we need to get rid of that times 6. We can do that by dividing by 6. And because it's an equation, if we divide that by 6, we've got to do the same to everything. So all of that is going to be divided by 6. We can then go ahead and look to simplify. And I'm here aiming to get everything to look like a fraction now. Please avoid decimals. So we've got to have x squared minus 1/6 of x. That 1 comes from the invisible 1 up the top there. And then that's going to be minus 1/6 as well. And 0 divided by 6 is still 0. We then go a look and we're trying to find, well, what is 1/2 of this part here? And that's going to be negative 1 over 12. And what is negative 1 over 12 when we square it? Well, that's going to be positive 1 over 144. So that's going to be negative 1 squared and 12 squared. We then go ahead and we look to put that into our equation. So we're going to have x squared minus 1 over 6x. And we're going to plus that number, 101 over 144. We're then going to subtract that same number. And we're then going to go minus 1/6. Except this time around, I'm going to change that to have the same denominator. That's actually going to become 24 over 144. And I know that there is equal to 0. And here we can form that square part. So this bit here should be a perfect square. So that there is going to be x. Don't forget about the number we had before, minus 1 over 12 squared. And that is going to become minus 25 over 144. That's equal to 0. we're now going to move this to the other side. So that there is going to be x minus 1 over 12 squared. That's going to be equal to 25 over 144. We can then go ahead and solve. We'll get rid of the square by doing a square root. So we've got x minus 1 over 12. It looks like we're going to run out of room here. Is equal to plus or minus the square root of 25 over 144. And we can square root everything. So the square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 144 is 12. So we're going to have x minus 1 over 12 is going to be equal to 5 over 12. Oh, I shouldn't forget that plus or minus sign there. I'm going to carry on my working in this direction. We can now figure out first, oh no, actually we've got a little bit of working to do. So we're now going to go x is equal to 1 over 12. And I'm doing this, so this here is negative. I move it to the other side, it becomes positive. And that's going to be plus or minus 5 lots of, or 5 over 12. We can then go ahead and figure out our answers. So the first answer for x is equal to 1 over 12 plus 5 over 12. That there is 6 over 12, which is 1 over 2. And that makes sense because that was our first answer on the other side. And our second answer to x is going to be 1 over 12 minus 5 over 12. That there is going to be equal to negative 4 over 12, which gets us to negative 1 over 3. And again, liking that answer, that matches that one we got earlier. So that was definitely the most annoying and hardest bit of maths we're going to be doing in this video. So hopefully that made sense. And the last one is going to be the easiest one. As soon as you see that number of 6 in front of the x squared, you probably should be looking to use the quadratic formula. So we'll call it QF. And don't forget your calculators can help you with these. It does mean you can avoid the grouping method. It does mean you can avoid the nasty completing the squares as well. So let's jot down our equation. So we've got 6x squared and we've got minus x minus 1 is equal to 0. Find your a, b, and c values. A is equal to 6. B is equal to negative 1. Not making any mistakes this time. C is equal to negative 1 as well. And then just a reminder, at this point here, you can use your calculator just to smash in A, B, and C. But let's go through the actual formula just for fun. So we've got negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. All of that is divided by 2a. So negative b is negative 1. And we're going to go plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared. We're going to go minus 4 times 6 times negative 1. All of that is divided by 12. We're then going to start simplifying. So negative 1 is 1. And we're going to go plus or minus. So negative 1 squared is positive 1. Negative 4 times 6 is negative 24. Times negative 1 is positive 24, so we've got 1 plus positive 24, so that's going to be the square root of 25. All of that is divided by 12. We can then simplify that a little bit, so that's going to be 1 over 12 plus or minus 5 over 12. And again, at this point here, you'll see a lot of similarity between the calculation you have there and the completing the square approach. So let's go ahead and finish our answer. So the first answer for x will be 1 over 12 plus 5 over 12. That there is equal to 6 over 12, which is 1/2. Again, big fan, matches our previous questions. And the next one, the second value of x, 1/12 minus 5/12. That there is negative 4 over 12, which is negative 1 over 3. And again, matches our other answers. So guys, a longer video, but hopefully it recaps the 3 different ways to calculating quadratic equations. And we did a hard example where it's x squared, and then we did an example where that x squared has a coefficient, and there's a few annoyances that come out of that. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Now let's try to practice each of these methods a few times, because you never know what's actually going to come up in that exam.